A Matter of Price, Part 2. Conan found himself smirking. The woman and her attitude aroused him. He did, however, have to goad her to establish his place in their band. Being the newest member also meant he was on the bottom, and he would be expected to peck his way up. "I can't help but notice you have chosen to do it safely from a distance rather than up close and personal," Conan teased. "Get close and personal with me, you Cimmerian, and I will gouge you with a dull knife," she shot back. She flipped her long braid behind her, over her shoulder. "How long until the others join us?" Conan asked. "Marcellus was busy talking with a contact. Tyrol is with him. Parkar is busy earning us some foraging coin," Coconut informed him. "I see," Conan said. "Oh, admit it, Cimmerian. Marcellus's scheme has worked. The Vengean trusts you, and will think of us the next time he needs something pilfered. You doubted the wisdom of Marcellus's ruse, and now you must eat a bit of crow," Coconut said. "Well, so long as you remain out of sight," Conan replied. Coconut shrugged. The serving wench brought them ale and bread. They waited in silence for the rest of their small band to arrive. They did not have to wait very long before Parkar arrived. The small Zamoran slid into the booth next to Coconut. He placed a stack of coins on the table and gave some to Conan and some to Coconut. "Not a bad morning," Conan commented. "There are many devotees of Zath of the Eight Limbs on their way to his shrines. I am sure if they pray more ardently, the Fanged One will forgive them," Parkar replied. "Priests," Coconut spat, "the worst evil of your civilized lands." "You would prefer we all do the will of bone-rattling shamans?" Parkar countered. "You civilized folk do the bidding of scepter-waving kings, Parkar. There does not seem to be much difference between their control of their subjects and the shaman's control of a tribe," Conan commented. "Oh, well, of course you take her side. You're both barbarians," Parkar jested. The three of them laughed and continued to drink while they waited. Marcellus arrived next with his lover Tyrol in tow. The two Aquilonians wore their lorica openly over their tunics. This far from their homeland, they feared no penalty for their desertion. The two of them slid into the booth with their fellow thieves. Tyrol sat with his back to the band so that he could face the room. "Well met, Cimmerian," Marcellus began. "I see you were successful." Conan grunted. Deception did not come naturally to him. He preferred a bit of honest burglary, or a shadowy meeting in an alley. Still, his part in the ploy had not been an unpleasant experience. "It went well enough. We have established a friendship with Jadul. His guards are suspicious, of course. We must be careful not to let on that Coconut is one of our band, or Jadul is likely to have us killed. While I was there, they told me the tale of a man they had ostracized or killed for the loving of a wrong woman," Conan said. "Then it is on to our next adventure," Marcellus replied. "You know, my friends, of Durle Mok." Parkar choked on his drink. "Of course we know of the Spider Priest." Conan and Coconut glanced at each other to see if they knew this person. Neither did. They both shrugged. Parkar sighed in disgust. "Barbarians! I have fallen into the company of heathen barbarians all!" he mock-lamented. "Our sacrilege aside, Durle Mok has put out word he needs men willing to work for coin that ask no questions and tell no tales. He would like to interview us for the mission tonight," Marcellus said. "He has an army of followers. Why does he need hired knives?" Conan asked. "An excellent question, my Northman friend, the answer for which we will charge highly," Marcellus said with a wink. "He wishes to meet us after the third hour of the night. It would be best if we were presentable." "You mean," Coconut said as she placed a hand over Parkar's mug, "we should not be drunk or hungover." "The sacrifices I must make for my trade," Parkar lamented. "And to top it all off, I am underappreciated by the public. Dread Zath, the unfairness of it all." Conan and the others chuckled at the jovial display of the Zamoran. They ate more of the bread and some stew that the serving wench brought them. In the smoking tavern they traded jibes and dares, and feasted to their success. Conan was still learning of his companion's mannerisms and pasts. They paid more attention to Kokona than the others. Partly this was because of her beauty, but mostly it was because she was a mystery to him. She did not speak of why she had left her horse-riding kin. Conan supposed that it had been something simple. Perhaps a father who demanded she marry someone she had a low opinion of. Whatever had happened, it had left marks. Upon her wrist, she had the scars that could only have come from manacles. Conan had seen no more of her skin, much to his displeasure, but if she had manacle marks on her wrists, she was likely to have whip marks upon her back. He did not pity the men that must have enslaved her. Doubtless, her vengeance had been gory. Marcellus and Tyrol were less of a mystery to Conan. He had fought Aquilonians in his youth at the sacking of Venarium. He had met them all over the world as they pursued prophets. Not that Conan looked poorly upon prophet, but to him the Aquilonians seemed to worship golden coins as fervently as they swore by Mitra. Their love for one another was obvious, but Conan doubted if a homosexual affair was enough to make them desert the Legion. No. He fancied they had been given some order they had found detestable. Perhaps they had been ordered to kill someone they felt did not deserve it, or raise a village they adored. Then there was Parkar. The loud-mouthed, acerbic, talkative, and sarcastic thief had attached himself to Conan's company shortly after his disastrous adventure in the Tower of Yara. Their scheme had been simple. Conan would loom suddenly out of a dark corner and intimidate or stall a mark, while Parkar cut their purse or picked their pocket. They had a string of successes before they had been approached by Marcellus. Conan knew that Parkar had been caught twice before for his nimble fingers, yet somehow Parkar had convinced his guards not to crop his digits or his ears. Conan often wondered why Parkar had not simply opened a tavern of his own. He was a talented thief, but he seemed to love talking with people more. Whatever the reason, Conan had seen the wisdom in partnering with the short Zamorin. Now, he kept an alert watch while his friends feasted. Conan saw none in the tavern to be concerned about. He drank his ale and pondered what deed it was that Derle-Mock could wish a pack of thieves for. Part 3. They entered the street well before the time of their meeting with the priest. Marcellus had established a few safe drops around the city, and the band spent an hour double-checking the stewards who had sat upon these drops. Moving amongst the people, they maintained some discretion. Kokona did not walk with them, but either hung to their rear or skittered across the low rooftops. She wore a different veil and robe than the one she had worn the day of the ambush. The thieves then spent some time scouting the streets near the Temple of Zath. For this Conan was to remain behind, as his large frame was clearly recognizable. He waited in a gambling den. As he threw winning dice against the native Zamorans, Conan listened to the people's conversations. It seemed that nothing was happening that was out of the ordinary. Marcellus, Tyrol, and Parkar returned about an hour later and gambled alongside the Cimmerian until the appointed hour. Between the Temple of Zath and the nearest buildings, there were crowded streets. A distance of 20 yards separated the buildings. Marcellus stroked his hair in a hand motion that let Kokona know that he wished her to remain absent from the meeting. She would remain on a rooftop and wait for them. Conan knew that the Hyrcanian was even now preparing her bow. Should they exit the temple in flight, she would be there to discourage any pursuit. The outside of the temple was open to the public. Arinjun's guards were stationed there to discourage any thieves from entering. As Marcellus and his band entered, they drew a disgusted glance from the guards. Conan was sure it was because that they were foreigners. In every land in which he had traveled, the foreign traveler was always unwelcome. Unless they had coins to spend, of course. Inside the temple, a large idol in the shape of a spider dominated the room. Before it, petitioners genuflected and begged the god Zath for his intervention. Now it was Conan's turn to be disgusted. In his own homeland, men did not beg the gods for intervention. Any god worth its divinity ignored such cowardly begging. They walked past the worshippers and the braziers that smelled of smoking herbs. They arrived at a door that was flanked not by the guards of the city, but by a pair of priests. These were priests that held low station amongst the cult, and as such they wore no adornment, and simple white robes. One of the priests bowed to them and motioned for them to follow. Marcellus was waved through the door, and the thieves followed. They were led up a stair, and finally to a chamber on the second story of the temple. The priest motioned for them to wait, and then departed. The The chamber was not barred with doors, but curtains instead served as a separating divider. Conan scanned the room. It was bare save for the cushions the Zamorans used as chairs, and a rug upon which the pillows were strewn. A platter of fruit and a pitcher of water sat in the center of the rug. "Where is the priest?" Tyrell asked his allies. "Playing the dominance game by making us wait, he assures his importance," Marcellus said. "He already has an entire cult at his beck and call. I think his dominance is evident," Conan grumbled. "It is a game civilized people play," Marcellus replied. "I'm not sure I care to learn it then," said Conan, but he vowed to remember the tactic nonetheless. "Lancer takes consort, mate in 3 moves," Parkar joked. "Be alert," Marcellus commanded. They did not have much longer to wait. A quarter of an hour passed, and a gong rang. Chanting inside the temple began below them. A female acolyte passed and changed out the candles that had burned down and refilled lamps that were low with oil. Behind her 2 priests entered, waving censers of a cloying smoke. The priests took up positions on either side of the door by which they entered, and 4 more priests bearing swords followed them. The swords were held ceremonially rather than with any intent to harm. When the priests entered, they made a line with a gap between them. Walking between the armed pairs, an elderly man presented himself. He was dressed in a solid black robe, and on his fingers there were many rings. Bracers fashioned into the likeness of spiders were on his wrists, and his robe sleeves were tucked into these. He bore no weapon upon his person, for all the priests about him were his weapons to command. This was Durle-Mok, the spider priest of Zath. "Marcellus the Aquilonian and his sword brother Tyrell, I assume?" the priest said. "Aye. Are you Durle-Mok?" Marcellus asked the man. "I am. I am very pleased to see you feel yourselves meet for my task. But tell me, who is the giant in your train?" Durle asked. "Conan," the Cimmerian answered. The priest next to Durle betrayed no sign of recognition. They were all silent as each wore a gag. Dressed all in black attire with shaved heads, they made for an eerie cohort. Conan noticed that the robes seemed embroidered with passages of a foreign script. He cared not for what it read, though if he were honest with himself, it would be because he had feared to know. His experience with sorcerers and magic had never been kind. "Ah, a celebrity. Even in the sacred halls of Zath, far removed from the corruptible streets, we have heard tell of the man who brought down Yara's tower. You have done us a great service." Durle-Mok waved his hand in a circular motion to show his gratitude. Conan nodded his head in acknowledgement. He decided he did not like the priest. "We are here to discuss your task," Marcellus said. Of course, please. Let us make ourselves comfortable," Durle replied. He walked to one of the cushions and lowered himself to it. Marcellus and Tyrell also sat. Conan was reluctant to do so, yet he feared making some social faux pas that could keep them from their coin. So eventually he sat as well. Parkar was last to seat himself, hovering near Conan for protection. "My task is a delicate one," Durle began. "I have come into possession of a valuable supplicant for Zath. Unlike priests of lesser gods who must consult in conclaves and debate scripture, the loyal of Zath can hear his will directly. I have divined the will of Zath. He wishes for a supplicant to join him in his abode. I require that your band escort the supplicant to her appointment with Zath. This must be done in the temple that sits in Shadazar, so there will be travel required. Once at the temple, you will turn the supplicant over to the priests there, and they will see to your pay." "The task seems little fitted to thieves. More a task for sellswords," Tyrell commented. "The most pressing concern is that the men involved be trustworthy," Durle said, "and none are so trustworthy as those who work for coin and the assurance of the pain that shall be visited upon them if they fail." True enough. "How much coin are we to be compensated in?" Marcellus asked. As the men haggled over the price, Conan took the measure of their silent watchers. The priests betrayed no sign of their thoughts or intent, yet Conan noticed that their stance was on the balls of their feet. They had been soldiers at some point. I would see the person we are escorting, Marcellus said. Of course, Conan heard Durley say. Bring us the supplicant. A few moments passed, and two more of the black-robed priests entered. Between them a small figure veiled from head to toe in black was held between them. When they arrived, they brought the supplicant to the rug and forced them to kneel. They retracted the veil, and before the thieves a young girl was revealed to them. She had been crying, and her face was puffy. Conan could see small spider bite marks upon her cheeks. She had been gagged and bound. Her wild expression sought sympathy from them. "This is the supplicant," Durley said. "She does not seem willing," Conan said. "Supplication often comes after a trial in which the will is broken. All that is left is the submission to the will of divine Zath," Durley crooned. "She will accept his tender mercy in the end." "She is to be tortured, then?" Marcellus asked. "Your friend knows that sometimes the pain we suffer in the name of the great God must be induced, but in the end it is always for the benefit of our souls," Durley said, pointing to Parkar. Conan regarded his little friend. A look of shame was upon the thief's face. He glanced at Conan, and their gazes met. Silently the short thief asked Conan not to be part of this, to get up and walk away. Conan's inclinations were different. He stared at Parkar and motioned the thief's gaze towards the priests at the door. Perceiving his intent, Parkar panicked. His eyes went wide, wondering if Conan had gone mad to even think of such a reckless idea. "It seems a great deal of trouble and precaution," Marcellus said. "Is there anything we should know?" "Yes, she bites," Durley laughed. "But she can be tamed by a strong man." The lewd insinuation in the priest's voice hardened Conan's resolve. Accepting the inevitable, Parkar quickly nodded. He rose rapidly and walked towards the door, holding his groin. "My apologies! Too much wine!" Parkar mumbled as he ran. Marcellus and Tyrell shot a look at the Cimmerian. Conan made a small hand motion that meant, "We cannot do this. Kill them." Conan had expected an argument from the lovers. Conan had no qualms liberating a man's wealth if the man had more than he needed, and he would face any man in battle for coin. He could turn a blind eye to many of civilization's vices and faults so long as he was paid. Yet this he could not be a part of. Amongst the warring Cimmerian tribes, human sacrifice was unknown. Marcellus returned his gaze. To Conan's surprise, not only did the Aquilonian acknowledge the Cimmerian's rejection of the offer, with a slight motion of his left hand he communicated to Conan, "It meant, grab the girl on my signal." Conan quickly looked to Tyrell and repeated the hand gesture. Tyrell's expression was grim, but he nodded. "Is your hesitation a matter of price?" the priest asked Marcellus. "No," said Marcellus. Then he struck. With a lunge he stabbed his dagger towards the old priest's chest, but the priest was wearing mail and padding underneath his robe, and the dagger was deflected. Tyrell was on his feet as well, a gladius in each of his hands. He smote at the silent priests. The priest he attacked raised his sword and warded off the strike, but Tyrell's second gladius severed the man's fingers, and the priest dropped his weapon. At the door, Parkar quickly sunk his daggers into the arteries of the guards' necks. While his friends engaged the priests, Conan swept out his own sword and took the legs out from under one of the sword-bearing priests. Then he lunged and stabbed one of the priests holding the girl. The other priest grabbed the child and placed her between Conan and himself. He whisked out a dagger of his own and held it up to her neck. Conan paused. "He won't kill her! Sacrifices to Zath cannot be slain except during the ceremony!" Parkar called. He tossed a dagger at the priest that was about to flank Conan, distracting the man. Conan spun and cut the man in twain with a falling strike. Tyrell was busy battering the defenses of a sword-wielding priest, and Marcellus was chasing after Durley Moch. The old man, however, proved very spry and evaded the Aquilonian. Conan turned back to the priest holding the girl captive. He advanced, and the pure menace in his mien caused the priest to abandon his prize and turn to flee. Conan struck him down from behind. "Just wages for all cowards," Conan spoke. Then he lifted the terrified child. Heaving her over his shoulder, he He turned to face the room. Only a pair of priests remained. The silent men were embattled by Tyrol and Marcellus. Behind them Parkar skittered, and when they were unaware he sliced their calves. The men fell and the Aquilonians finished them off. Gongs were sounding all throughout the temple. The thieves went to retreat the way they had come, but at the foot of the stair a group of priests had assembled to block their exit. The priests were unarmored, but bore clubs. "Not a one of them is man enough to match us," Conan proclaimed as he strode down the stairs. A priest rushed him with a yell, and Conan did not deflect the strike. Instead, he cut the man's striking arm off with a powerful sweep of his sword. The priest fell screaming and clutching at his lost hand. Conan kicked him down the stairs. "Come, dogs! Try those sticks against my steel if you dare!" he called. The priests parted, and from between them stepped a man dressed in a strange kind of brigandine armor and a tightly wound turban. In each of this man's hands there was a large ring. Conan did not understand the purpose of the rings, and thought perhaps some mummery was about to be performed. When the man looked up, Conan could see he was Vengean. The Cimmerian made an intuitive leap. "Master Garupar?" Conan asked. "We have not met before. How is it you know me?" Garupar asked. "I was a guest of your former master, Jadul Rajam," Conan said. "Ah, they still tell tales of me then?" Garupar asked. "Aye," Conan replied. "It is well that they remember the strokes I gave them in training. Tell me, man of the West, how is it you plan to escape this place?" Garupar asked. "Through them," Conan pointed with his sword towards the priests. "And you as well, if I must." "Direct. Simple. Honorable," Garupar commented with approval. "But not to be." "Conan, back!" Marcellus called. "We can make it through the front," Conan shouted without looking over his shoulder. "We've better chances on the roof," Marcellus called. Conan understood Marcellus's plan. He wished to lure the priests to the roof so that Coconut could snipe them with arrows. It would indeed greatly even the odds. Conan detested having to run, but he could not fight off the priests alone. He began to retreat while keeping his front to the armed men in front of him. "I think not," Garupar said. Then he flung the rings. Conan ducked one of the rings as it whirled over his head. The other, however, found a mark. Tyrol screamed and dropped his left sword. The ring was embedded in his hand and had sunk into his bones. "Crom!" Conan swore. "No, they are called chakrams, Northman. Before tonight is over, you shall know their kiss," Garupar taunted. The thieves ran across the second floor, passing through rooms filled with fleeing acolytes, and priests that cowered over their sacred scrolls. A few armed men barred their path, but were quickly struck down by the fleeing men. They reached the roof and sought for some way to bar the entrance, but there was none. Upon the roof of the temple, there were some small tables and cushions for priests to observe the stars. These Parkar quickly turned over to make some makeshift cover. Conan sat the girl down behind them and looked to her. He unbound her wrists with a quick cut of his dagger and ungagged her. "Do what we tell you, and you might live through this night, girl," he barked. She nodded in frightened agreement. By the stair they had come up, Marcellus and Tyrol took up position to bar the way. "Find us a way down," Marcellus told Conan. The Cimmerian complied. He looked over the edges of the roof, seeking a way for his companions to flee. Having had years of experience climbing hills, he would be able to descend any surface, but his companions would be less able, particularly Tyrol with his wounded hand. Conan heard the sound of shouting and some clashing of steel behind him. He had to hurry. He glanced up from his task for a moment to see how desperate their situation was. Tyrol and Marcellus had slain 3 priests who had rushed them, but now they were being pressed by a knot of men. One of the men fell from an arrow in his lung. Coconut had found them. Conan waved to her. He placed his hands together and then pulled them apart. His request was answered. An arrow with a blunt tip landed by his feet. Attached to its end was a thin string. Conan grabbed the string and began pulling. Across the open expanse above the street, the other end of the string jerkily crossed the air. It was tied to a thicker rope that could bear the weight of the men. Conan speedily pulled with both his arms. It felt like it took an eternity for the rope to cross. Once he had it in his hands, Conan tied the rope to a stout outcropping, support of the temple roof. Conan turned to see how his friends fared. Now a dozen bodies littered the stair. Conan motioned for the girl. She ran across the roof and was almost to the Cimmerian when something bounced off her skull. She stumbled and fell to the roof, holding her head. The object had been one of the chakrams that Garupar threw with an almost sorcerous accuracy. It did not bear an edge like the one that had buried itself into Tyrell's hand. Without the child being able to move of her own, the swordmaster had managed to stall their departure from the roof. "Parkar, grab the girl!" Conan ordered, as he rushed the knot of priests. The priests were nearing enough of an advantage in their press where Garupar could walk behind them and onto the roof unimpeded. Conan lifted a body from the pile and tossed it into the mass of approaching men. Some of the priests fell under the weight of the body, giving the thieves a much-needed space. In this space Tyrell flung a burning lamp that he had snatched from along the path of their escape. Now they had the benefit of a momentary burning barrier. "Across the rope!" Marcellus ordered. He grabbed one of the tables for cover. Conan grabbed the other. In front of the support on which Conan had tied the rope, they set the tables, as what cover that they could manage. Conan saw that Parkar was already halfway across the distance. He motioned for Marcellus to go across next. "No, Tyrell go," Marcellus said. "I remain," Tyrell said. "Don't be daft, man! Go!" Marcellus argued. "I will only slow us down, Marcellus," Tyrell stated. He clapped Marcellus on the shoulder. "This is where it ends for me. This is my final stand, my love." "No," Marcellus spoke. "Let the man sell his life for a worthy cause, Marcellus. We've not much time," Conan said grimly. Marcellus wished for more time to speak with Tyrell, but he could see that Conan and Tyrell were correct. They had not the time. Marcellus grabbed his lover's head and pressed their foreheads together. He gave Tyrell a parting kiss, and then he slipped his arms over the rope and began crossing the street. Conan turned towards the fires that were beginning to die. "Are there any rites you Cimmerians perform before certain death?" Tyrell asked. "Only one," Conan said. "What is that?" Tyrell asked. "We make others precede us," Conan said with a grim smile. Tyrell laughed. Conan laughed. "Come on then, you spider-worshipping bastards," Tyrell called. As if in answer to his wish, the Zamorans charged. Before they reached Conan and Tyrell, one of them fell clutching his thigh as an arrow pierced it. Conan and Tyrell met the priests and matched them sword stroke for club stroke. Two of the priests scored hits along Tyrell's torso, but his armor cushioned the blows. Conan's wide-sweeping blade cut down two priests before any got near enough to strike at him. The priests began to concentrate their efforts on Conan, denying him the chance to mount an effective offense. Conan made them pay with counters that wounded them, but he could not gain a killing blow on any. Tyrell was faring no better. Restricted to one arm and weapon, he found his natural style of fighting with two weapons a hindrance. He managed to kill a priest, but was also being pressed by the others. A semicircle of priests surrounded him and prodded him towards the stairs from which the thieves had arrived upon the roof. Then the priests broke off their attack and stepped back. Tyrell turned and found himself now facing Garupar. The Vengean bore a slim, curved sword in each of his hands. The swordmaster looked at Tyrell's wounded hand. Then he returned one of his weapons to its sheath. "For your loyalty," Garupar said. Then he attacked. The attack came as a descending slice that Tyrell met with his raised gladius. The tulwar that Garupar wielded bounced off the blocking action and sliced Tyrell's midsection. The Aquilonian skipped backward, and the blade cut into his armor. It sliced into the lacings that met in the center of the lorica and cut them cleanly. Though the armor was still upon Tyrell's chest, it was also now loose, creating a gap. Garupar and Tyrell struck at each other a few more times with the blades sparking, but with a twist of his body, Garupar ducked a strike. Not needing to block the incoming strike from Tyrell, allowed him to strike with his own tulwar. He slashed upward and the cut slipped into the gap in Tyrell's armor that had been exposed. The blade cut through Tyrell's side, and he fell. As the blade retracted, blood and viscera flew across the roof. Garupar took a moment to salute the fallen man. Then he strode towards Conan. The priests had lost three more of their number, two from Conan's flashing blade, and another from the killing darts of Kokona. Conan batted aside a strike from a priest and grabbed his shoulder. He spun the priest in front of him just as a chakram buried itself in the man's chest. Conan dropped the dying man and swiped at a nearby priest. Then the priest retreated a step or two. The one Conan had just missed fell from an arrow in his chest. "We shall have no interference in this contest," Garupar spoke. He flicked a bladed disc across the distance. Conan feared that the disc was speeding for the rope. He imagined his friends plunging to the street almost 30 feet below, but instead, the disc flew across the divide between the buildings and sliced Kokona's bowstring. She looked down at the snapped string and marveled at the feat. It had not been luck. The swordmaster had intended this and hit his mark across 70 feet and in the dark of night. "Shall we?" Garupar asked Conan. He waved the priests away. The robed men backed up to give the new combatants space. "You are a far sight better a match than those sorry dogs," Conan growled. "I certainly am." "So was your friend," Garupar said as he motioned to Tyrell. "He won't be dining with the gods alone," Conan threatened. "Surely not," Garupar agreed. He drew his second sword. "Any questions before we begin?" "The woman you and your master quarreled over, whatever happened to her?" Conan asked. Garupar's easy manner faded. "We married. We loved. I lost her in childbirth. The medicine of these savages is primitive, and Jadul would not allow us access to Pitambar's talents." "I see. So now you work for the heathens you despise?" Conan asked. "None of the armies nor mercenary bands of this land seem to want my services. The color of my skin, or I suspect Jadul's doing. Either way, my talents as tutor and bodyguard were going to waste. Then Derle Mok heard of my skill. He was quite willing to pay for my service. I will most likely have to perform some merit in a future life to burn away this karma. But such is life, imperfect and imprecise. Are you satisfied? Know you enough about me to die with your curiosities met?" Garupar asked. Conan glanced over his shoulder to the roof where Kokona was standing. Marcellus and Parkar had made it across the rope. They needed time to evade pursuit and make Tyrell's death have meaning. An idea occurred to him. He faced Garupar. "Of course. Let us begin," Conan said. The swordmaster advanced more cautiously than he had with Tyrell out of respect for Conan's greater strength. He began with some probing slashes, and Conan deflected them expertly. Garupar raised an eyebrow in surprise. He backed up a step to reconsider his approach, and Conan used the moment to effect his plan. The barbarian dove off the roof and grabbed the rope with his free hand as he fell. Other men would have quailed at the idea of risking their lives in a 30-foot drop. But Conan was still young enough that he doubted death would come to him in any manner save that in which he chose. With a confidence born of his subconscious belief in his own immortality, he leapt. "Marcellus! Cut the rope!" Conan roared as he took flight over the edge. On the far side of the divide, Marcellus pulled forth the war axe he favored, and with a heavy chop he severed the rope on the far side of the divide. Slackened, the rope fell, and Conan used the momentum of the rope to guide himself safely through an open window in the second floor of the temple. He would have rappelled all the way to the ground but for the fear of Garupar pinning him with one of his hellishly accurate throwing discs. The swordmaster and the priests looked at the feat in amazement and confusion. It was a brutal display not only of cunning, but of the raw strength in the Cimmerian's arm that he could twist and guide himself mid-flight as if by will alone. Conan peered up at the roof from the large window he had dived through. "Some other occasion, Garupar!" Conan called, laughing. He heard above him the cries of priests raising the alarm, and of one appreciative swordmaster. As Conan ran through the temple, he found little resistance. Most of the priests and guard were on the upper floors. Once he was past the outer civil guards, who had enough of a sense of self-preservation that they sought not to bar the way of a fleeing Cimmerian, he was free in the streets. The Dizians of Aranjun parted before him, wishing to escape being trampled. Conan began to slow. He glanced over his shoulder and cursed softly. "Ishtar's breasts!" he muttered. Behind him, he caught the sight of a pursuing blue turban bouncing amongst the crowd. Garupar had outsped the priests and was in pursuit of his prey.